All right. You comfortable?
Yeah.
Yeah, so talk. Okay, so you're.
Well, yeah, things got a little confused there at the end because there were a lot of things I just kind of jumped over. And when you mentioned Sourdough Jim, that he played a big role in there. And Bentleyville, Scott was ready for everybody to start leaving.
Mhm.
We'd been there for quite a long time, maybe a couple of years, and nothing was getting done. We just were spending money and getting drunk and hanging out. And so Scott's brother, Brett, who we called Doc, he also got some money from his grandmother, and with his money he bought uh, some good piece of 10 or 40 or something acres of land on the south side of Moab, up in the cliffs, and there was a pond there.
Bentley Lake.
We called it um, Belly Acres.
Belly Acres.
Yeah.
Because is he still out there? Because I remember going out
Yeah,
there.
he's raising goats.
I remember going out there when I was a little kid.
Yeah, Belly Acres. He buys this place, Belly Acres. Well, Belly Acres was a trippy place because it was like, in the past, it had been some old Indian burial ground or something. And there were all these holes that people had dug looking for artifacts and stuff. So it was like this heavy place with these heavy vibes. And there was a spring there, this beautiful spring and a pretty good sized pond, for that in that country. About half of a basketball court sized pond. And we loved it there, and we'd go up there and we'd swim, and then there were a whole bunch of us that lived up there. I lived up there with Becky. Brett, Doc lived there with a gal named Donna, who's still in Moab. And there were some other people, I don't remember. But there again, it was all like we had an outdoor kitchen, and we had little places where outdoor holes that we used for sanitation and stuff. And but it was just a very, like, we're just living like this weird, like, feral kind of lifestyle, basically, out there in this dusty ass old place called Billy Acres. So I was kind of living at Billy Acres, I think, at the time. Really not at Bentleyville. Maybe maybe not. I don't know. I was kind of transitioning there. And that's when I met Sourdough Jim. And I say my dog goes over, starts hanging out with Sourdough Jim. I go over and me and Jim just hit it off right away. He's this like magical old guy, and I'm this young seeker guy. And we became buddies, and I would go over all the time just to go over and sit and visit with him. And he would talk about things, the past, his life as he didn't talk about his mining or anything, or he was more of a prospector than a miner. And he would talk a little bit about the old days and the old bar, the wagon wheel. But we also talked a lot about Jesus. And it was just because I've had some mentors in my life when it came to Jesus. And, Ty and I were both kind of mentors to each other. So I've always kind of thought of him as Ty as sort of a mentor. But I think I was as much of a mentor to Ty as he was to me, maybe even more so. And
what was Ty's philosophy?
Well, he was like this orphan boy almost. He wasn't an orphan, but he kind of left home when he was really, really young. He had been in a rock band in California, Sacramento, that was on its way to becoming a big deal. Back when rock bands were a big deal. He might have gone on to some great success. He could play guitar like nobody's business, and but he took a lot of acid, and I think I don't want to do that because there's too much ego involved in that kind of a life, and so he chose this. And there was a lot of, you really almost have to have been part of that whole thing because that really influenced so much of what all of us did. Like we didn't want to do things that would make us famous. We didn't want to do things that would make us rich. We really shunned all that stuff. That was like no, no, no. You don't want to sell out. You know, you don't want to become one of those people. So we kind of purposely hung out like like a bunch of characters from a Steinbeck book, and none of us had any aspirations whatsoever, except for just to be living in the moment, doing what we were doing. And so Ty was there, and he was hanging out, and he had his friends, and I had my friends, and they were the same friends. There was a guy named Big Jimmy that hung out, and everybody just loved him. Tragic story. He had two little boys that like he lived in a van with these two little boys. One night the damn kids knocked over a candle or something, and the whole van burned up with the two little kids inside. And Jimmy's there trying to get the door open. He couldn't get the door open to get the kids out, and he basically sat there and watched his two little boys burn to death. That was a tragic night. I remember that one. Ty and I showed up, like right after it had happened, and Captain Crud was there that night, and so we all loved Jimmy. We all felt really bad for him. He was just this big, he was like a tree, big, huge guy. Always went barefoot. Had feet. His feet were probably size 15 or something. Big, huge paws, and never wore shoes because he couldn't find shoes, that fit him. And he would laugh, because he had all this pain and sorrow, and we all did. Ty did. I did. Captain Crud did. Becky did. We all had Becky came from a divorced family. Kurt did. Ty had all sorts of troubles in his family. I don't know a lot about Jimmy's background, but I'm sure it wasn't very good either, but that was just kind of how it was for all of us. We were all, like I said, these black sheep that had kind of found each other somehow in life. And then when I found Sourdough Jim was kind of like my own thing. And I never really brought anyone over to Sourdough Jim's even, hardly. Maybe once, I think I brought Becky over once or something, but that was about it. And living right next door to Sourdough Jim was this gal, Leona. Well, Leona was Ty's girlfriend. So I don't know where he met her, but she's like this, 16-year-old girl or something that he met. The first time I met Leona was at the Westerner Cafe. She's sitting there eating with us, and that was where Becky worked. Becky worked the graveyard shift at the Westerner Cafe, which Becky, she does her story to tell about that, working at this wild. The Westerner was where everybody went when the bars closed. It was 24 hours. So there were 3 bars in Moab: the hippie River Runner bar, the pauper place where I worked. There was the Cowboy bar, which is called the Hitching Post, of course. And then there was this other bar where all the miners went, and that was called Woody's, world famous Woody's Tavern. And the guys over at the miners bar, they always like to fight. Every now and then they'd come rambling over to the pauper place, and they'd try to fight us. But we were all like these acid head hippies. We kind of, somehow we knew how to throw them off. So they'd come over to fight, but we'd goof them to the place. And I had weird stuff. Like one time all these guys come in, this guy pulls out a gun, I just walked up and took the gun from him. I said, "You can have this when you go," And so there was a possibility for a lot of violence, but it never happened. Because, I don't know if you ever read it wasn't Ken Kesey's book, it was Tom Wolfe's book, Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test. But he talks about how the Merry Pranksters had invited the Hells Angels into their group. And how the Merry Pranksters, they just kind of kept pranking the Hells Angels so to where there was never any trouble, really. And that's kind of what we did. We just kind of played with these people, and they thought we were like crazy, So they'd come over to fight us, but before they left, they would end up thinking we were okay, because we weren't really afraid of them, but we weren't going to be like them, And so that was a whole scene. But so I was pretty distressed over the thing with Becky, And like I said, I don't know if I was living in Bentleyville or up at Billy Acres by then. And it all doesn't make sense because I know Becky lived with me up at Billy Acres for a while. And but like I said, she was off and on with me for a year, for 3 years, and you'll get later on that had its consequence. But so I started hanging out at Sourdough Jim's, and then eventually I just moved in with him. And I say he was a mentor to me about Jesus. And he had a picture of Jesus on the wall. It was one of those pictures where if you got up, like the eyes would follow you across the room and stuff. Real mysterious and magical stuff going on over at Sourdough Jim's. And he had all this stuff that he had made. This weird little craft shit that he had put together. He was always doing something with his hands, stuff like those little things over there that I made, you know. So he had a lot of that kind of stuff, and like I said, he was a performer. He would like do these little dances, and he had 2 dogs, Heidi and Frosty, little dogs. Somehow or another, I ended up moving in with him, sleeping on the couch, and his house was like just this old shack, real long and skinny shack. It was like one room, because they would just add another room. There was a room, and then another room, and another room, and another room. And, you know, he lived there off his pension. And he was kind of crippled up. I guess he'd had syphilis when he was younger. That had messed with him real bad.
Oh, yeah.
And he also had some strokes and stuff, so he could just barely walk around. And, but I lived there with him, and him and I would sit there. He always had the TV on, always. Herschel did the same thing, and I could see that's where I'm heading. And so TV would always be on, and he liked to watch the old guys, not Pat Robertson so much, but some of these other guys. Some of them were actually really good, and
televangelists.
Yeah, but it was back before they all
got
become like Joel Osteen,
like Billy Graham, or
more along those lines.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were for real, you know, kind of for the most part. But so he'd have those on, and we'd sit there and talk. But we talked about Jesus, and to me, he presented Jesus to me as a very magical kind of a person. Because Sourdough Jim was very magical. Like, he seemed like I could be out, I'd come home. It seemed like he always knew what I'd been doing. Like, he knew where I was. He didn't have to ask me. He's like, well, how was the dance tonight? And I was like, oh, it was okay, you know. And he'd like, how come that girl didn't dance with you? And I'd be, oh, I don't know. I guess she didn't like me, you know. But he had this uncanny ability to know everything I was doing somehow. And it was really, it's so hard. I wish I could describe Sourdough Jim better. A picture of him goes a long ways, just to look at a picture of him.
I don't know if I've ever seen a picture.
I have a picture. I have 2 pictures of him.
Okay.
And he was just this beautiful. Like I say, he fed cockroaches and stuff. You know, I mean, he just wouldn't hurt anything ever. You know, he was that kind of guy, and that was kind of something he instilled in me too, which I was already that way myself. I was already like that, but he kind of helped me to accept that part of myself. It was like, no, it's okay to be eccentric that way. It's okay to love bugs. You know, it's okay to care for things that don't care for you, you know. It's okay to be this way. Love is the answer, sort of. He was really into that whole thing of just being this old magician who wanted to turn lead into gold, kind of, you know. And he didn't talk to anybody that I ever saw outside of me and him. But Leona lived next door. Leona becomes Ty's girlfriend. She's only just a little kid, you know. She's like 16, and we're in our 20s, you know, by now. Ty was like 4 years older than me. And so next thing you know, Leona's knocked up, pregnant, and she already had a little girl named Denise. And she lived there with her mom. It was like this little, you know, it was just like out of a book. You know, there's Leona with her mom and her little girl Denise. Lives next door to Sourdough Jim. Kind of like the story of Heidi or something, you know, like there's the old man who kind of watches out for them, give them money sometimes and stuff. And So Leona and I had a bond because of Sourdough Jim, but we also had a bond because she was hanging out with Ty.
Mm-hmm.
So we became friends, and we're still friends today on Facebook, although she's real mad at me because I'm not a Democrat. But, you know, I wouldn't vote for Harris because of the genocide. So,
So is that who? What are Ty's kids' names?
Ty's kids' names are Sharon Rose. He called her Buggles. Heidi, or is that right, Heidi? Yeah, Heidi. Although she goes by Callius or something now. And Amanda.
And are they all Leonas or different moms?
No, those are all from Leona.
Okay.
So he's like having these babies with Leona and running around with Becky the whole time. You know, and him and Becky were on and off, just like she was with me. You know, and and I'm hanging out with Sourdough Jim. Well, eventually one day I come home and Sourdough Jim's laying on the floor, and he'd had a big stroke. And I know that they didn't, like, Jim didn't want, he wanted to just die in his house there. But I let the word get out that he was in his bed dying. And so, sure enough, the EMTs showed up. And one of the EMTs was a good friend of mine named Terry Lazier, really sweet, wonderful woman. And she comes in and she's like, "It's okay, we're gonna take Jim and take him into the hospital." So they took him into the hospital. And basically, I inherited all of Jim's stuff and his two dogs. Nobody said anything. It's just I was there, and it all kind of became mine. And Jim's son from someplace way long away shows up one day, and I don't know what he did. He just kind of showed up and signed whatever papers needed to be signed or something, and then I don't know if they cremated him or buried him or what, but they didn't really bring me in to the thing. I know Jim was, I don't remember where he was, but he was in like a hospital. I took his dogs to see him, and that was like a huge thing for him when I brought his dogs in, and smuggled the dogs in to see him there in the hospital. He loved his dogs, so I ended up inheriting these two dogs. I had both of them for quite a while, and then they both disappeared in their own ways. But so Sourdough Jim, my life with Sourdough Jim was very special to me. And I'd say he was a mentor. He wasn't just a friend. He taught me a certain way of dealing with everything that goes on around me, and it had to do with just being total, like, he was like this guru of love and kindness. Kindness being the big thing, you know. And then later on, Herschel comes in, you know, because I mean, I really wish I could remember the sequence, but I just don't. But there again, because of Becky.
Just to kind of, you spend 15 years in Moab, right?
Yeah.
But it does seem like all of this is kind of like, it's not very differentiated for you.
Well, it seems like it all happened at once.
Yeah.
And it kind of did.
Yeah.
Like there were all these years where not much happened at all.
Yeah.
And then there was a couple years where like all this stuff happened at once. And it kind of happened around my relationship with Becky. Because it really messed me up.
Yeah.
Because especially after we got married, then I was like on this thing of like, oh, I got to make this work and all this kind of, I didn't want to get a divorce and all this kind of stuff.
Well, but now, okay, so then Herschel, how do you meet Herschel?
Well, there again, I had the blues for Becky real bad. Becky's living up at the house that her and I lived in, because Becky and I had a house of our own there for a while, called the Tick Bunker, and we lived there, and that was a big party scene. Everybody, Ty and everybody else, they were all hanging out at the Tick Bunker, you know, and that was a great little place, kind of back in the back of town, and we had parties and everything, played music and stuff. That's where we started our band called Joe's Nose. It was there at the Tick Bunker. That was fun. And but somehow or another, like there again, I'm still taking lots of acid and stuff. And I was really down and out. And everybody knew it, you know. And I had taken some acid, and I went out to Matrimony Spring. Matrimony Spring is this beautiful old spring along the side of Highway 128, right pretty much where 128 intersects with the main highway going into Moab, right there along the Colorado River. There's a lot of magic stories about the Matrimony Springs. If you drank from it, you'll always come back and stuff like that, silly stuff. So anyway, I'm there, really high on acid, and I'm sitting there at Matrimony Springs, and I had enlightenment hit me.
Okay.
And it was just like something had happened to the Buddha, the same thing. Just the whole veil of everything just lifted. I could basically like see it. Everything, all my worries. I mean, I was dying from depression. I had been for years. I've been going through this thing. My best friend and my wife are having this affair, and I'm supposed to still be part of it. And it was just too confusing, too crazy. All this crazy stuff going on. And so I had been under all this traumatic, stress for quite a long time, which I think was what brought on this experience. And so I'm sitting there, and like I said, it was just like sitting under the bodhi tree or whatever it was, and the whole thing, and I just knew everything. I knew everything. There was nothing I needed. There was nothing I wanted. I knew you could have asked me anything, I would have told you the answer. It was just an amazing experience. I hadn't really heard much about other people having experiences like that. Later on, I learned that happens to people sometimes. And they have different things that they call it, But it was the most remarkable thing that can happen to you and still be alive, basically. I mean, just total enlightenment. And what was funny, like I learned something, because I was sitting there on a rock when all this happens, like I'm out there in the Utah Canyonlands in the river, and big huge cliffs and a spring right there. And I realized that, well, I had to move. I couldn't just sit there forever. It was like something was telling me, okay, you have to move. And I kind of learned a little thing, which is that in life, anything that's alive moves. Everything that's alive moves. Like I kind of realized that. So it's like, I have to move because I'm alive and like molecules and stuff are moving. So I remember like standing up to move and I didn't have no idea where to go because there was nothing I wanted. There was nowhere I wanted to go. There was nothing I wanted to do. I just knew I had to get up and start moving.
Okay.
So I stand up, and there was so much magic that happened to us in those days. So I stand up, and Ty comes driving up. Like right when I stand up, he just drove up like as he was sent by God to come pick my chauffeur to come pick me up or something. And I'm standing there just totally blissed out, And he's like, get in the car, And I'm like, okay, So I get in the car, and Ty had a job watching this old gold mine out on the river. It was, what do they call that, where they get gold out of the rocks and stuff. They had pan for it,
Yeah.
only with machines. Placer mining.
Okay.
So they had this placer mine out there. And nobody ever did anything there. They had all these junk machines sitting around, and Ty had a little camp trailer that he lived in, and I'd go out there. It was normal. Go out there and we'd play Yahtzee and Sorry, And so anyway, he drives me out there, and I'm there with him. I'm out there, and I have this other amazing experience because I'm out there, so I'm walking around, and for some reason I just thought, well, I'm just going to step off into the river. I wasn't trying to kill myself or anything really. I just step off into the river, So I'm still just high as shit, And so I just had this enlightenment moment an hour before, and then I like step off into the river, I didn't try to swim or anything, and just kind of floating along in the river, and then I kind of bounced up against some roots or something, and then, oh, okay, here I am. And then I got out of the river, you know. And then I had Jesus comes to me out there. And he gives it to me. Just gives it to me. It's like, you are the most rotten son of a bitch that's ever walked this planet. There's not one good thing about you. Everything in you is rotten. You're horrible. You don't deserve to live. You're just a terrible, rotten, horrible person. Everything that you've ever done, whether you thought you were doing it for someone else or what, and it doesn't matter. Everything you have done, you did it for yourself. Everything. You're just total self-serving person. There's no reason why I should even let you live. And I was like down, laying on the ground like in a ball, in tears basically, with Jesus basically standing over me, telling me I'm like the worst thing he's ever seen in his life, and how I didn't deserve to live at all. And this is really heavy shit, you know, because to me it was as real as anything I've ever done in my life, you know. And all of it is just as real as could be to me. And but then he says, "But I'll tell you what," he says, I'm Jesus, you know, and I'm going to forgive you. You don't deserve it. You don't deserve to be forgiven. You're a piece of shit, you know. But I'm Jesus, and so I'm going to forgive you. But from now on, you got to walk with me. If you'll do that, I'll forgive you. You walk with me, I'll forgive you. And I'll make your life amazing. You'll have an amazing life. But if you ever veer off from walking with me, I'll take everything away from you just as quick as I gave it, quicker than this, you know. And you will find yourself in worse condition than you are right now. And that was pretty heavy. It's like, okay, well, I'll do that, you know. I'll go with you, you know. And it's been that way still to this day, where I know that if I leave Jesus and start walking the wrong path, I will, life will be really, really horrible for me. And I've had some really hard things happen to me, but they weren't horrible things like having Jesus like bail on you. Jesus has been with me through all the stuff I've been with over the last couple of years, and still to this day. But that was, you know, I have this awakening, and then I run into Jesus both on the same day. And he's like, okay, this is real. So I left ties, like walking barefoot, walked back to Moab or something, and then just on it went, you know. I don't know really what happened after that, but eventually, not too much longer after that, I was tired of this whole thing with Becky and going back and forth, and with Ty and all that. And I decided I was going to move. I was going out and getting firewood. That's how I was supporting myself. I'd pick up, I'd go out and get firewood, come back. I was like, they're in that woodhead phase, you know. And I'd go out and get the firewood. And then I decided...
Did you have a nickname?
One Shot.
Oh, One Shot, that's right. Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah, everybody called me One Shot.
Everybody called you One Shot, right. Okay, anyway, continue.
Yeah, and they called me that. Like,
yeah.
It wasn't just...
Well, I know, because I don't even know the real names of most of these people, but I've heard about them all my life, and I never even knew that. You know.
Yeah, I was One Shot. You know, and,
anyway,
Becky, they called Becky B. You know, like Auntie B or something. And there was a girl named Mary. One of my favorite names. He called her Shipwreck.
Shipwreck. I've heard of Shipwreck Mary. Yeah.
Mary was. And she really was, you know. I mean, and Ty had the best names, you know. She was like somebody you'd put on the prow of your ship, you know, and then go out and wreck it, you know, Mary. But so I decided. So I was like, okay, I want to get out of here. So I went down to Bluff, which is about 100 miles south of Moab. And I thought, I'm going to go down here and see if I can move to Bluff.
Yeah.
So I go down there and I found like 3 job offers in one day and stuff. And I'm ready to move to Bluff. And I come back to Moab and this guy, Bob Walker, offers me a job working for, like he didn't really offer me the job. He just, hey, I'm going to set you up with this friend of mine named Neil Norman, and lives over in Hawaii. And he needs someone to come and take care of his palm tree ranch.
Yeah.
So I looked at Bob and I said, well, let me think about it for a minute. I said, okay, I'll go. And so, a week later, I'm on my way to, I sold or gave away everything I had. I had nothing when I left. I had a little suitcase about this big with a few, like, magical knickknacks, basically, in it. And I flew off to Kauai to go work for Neil Norman, who I'd never met. And that's a pretty good place to end the story today, really, because that's where my whole life changed once again.
Well, wait a second, though.
And
when the heck did you meet Herschel?
Oh, well, Herschel, it was probably right after I'd had that major experience with the Enlightenment and stuff. Somebody told me, because Herschel lived out in this place called Castle Valley, and he was another of these magical guys, these old guys.
How old was he when you met him?
He was in his 50s, and so word came down, and Herschel, there was this huge ranch out in Castle Valley, hundreds of acres, and they'd split it up into 5-acre lots. It was Carlisle Corporation or something, and they gave Herschel, for some strange reason, they give Herschel the job of overseeing this whole thing. Well, Herschel was basically turning it into this big, huge commune. You could buy 5 acres for $500 down, $50 a month. So they made it like really easy for people to buy land there. So all these hippies were buying these 5-acre lots and setting up teepees. And Herschel was just really being cool about it. Like, if he didn't want you there, he wouldn't sell you a piece of land, And so it was like this whole thing was happening kind of under Herschel's domain and everything. Herschel was a tough guy. He'd been to prison and stuff for some hardcore stuff. And he was kind of...
Do you know what?
I don't remember what. It was some tough guy stuff, But he's the kind of guy that'd kick your ass if he wanted to. And he had kind of a Dean Martin look. You know who Dean Martin is, And smoked constantly. All these guys did. Sourdough Jim, constant cigarette in their mouth. Herschel, me, Ty. We all did, And word came down the line that I was, somehow or another, Herschel found out that I was distressed. And he had sent word through this gal named Bobby to me.
I know Bobby.
Yeah. And Bobby was Niles's wife, who I mentioned earlier. Him and Bobby
I didn't know that they were.
Yeah, they had a couple kids, Daju and Iris.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so Bobby says, Herschel wants you to come out, see him. So I go out and land in Herschel. I get there and he pulls out his Bible, starts reading Bible to me. And basically it's like, well, you're here now, you're I'm your new mentor, basically. And I ended up moving in to Herschel's place. He had a little cabin. It was like so beautiful, so perfect. Like these were old, like the cabin I lived in had actually been like in a TV show called Alias Smith and Jones or something. It was this old, beautiful old little 2-story cabin that somebody built, big, huge cottonwood trees.
Yeah.
Very just this, in Castle Valley, which can't describe Castle Valley, one of the most amazing places on earth. It was just the place itself was pure magic, still is. And there's Herschel living there with Frankie, It was like some hooker that he met and married, and they had a daughter named Haven, and Herschel was extremely strict about things, but not really with me, because I never did anything that he needed to be strict with me about. But I'd get up in the morning, I'd wander over, and we'd sit there and drink black coffee and smoke cigarettes and joint after joint after joint. And Herschel grew the best weed ever. He grew these buds that were like, this big, dark purple buds. And when you'd smoke them, you'd like hallucinate.
Yeah.
This stuff was so good and so strong. And we'd sit there and smoke 4 or 5 of these joints while we were sitting there reading. He'd just basically read Bible, especially from the New Testament. And then we would talk about stuff, about Bible stuff and things. And so Herschel became this other mentor. And the thing that Herschel taught me, like I'd learned this really kind, loving part of Jesus. Well, Herschel taught me this other part, which was like the disciplined, don't fuck around, that, follow the law. There's a law here. You need to learn it. You need to learn what this law is, and then you need to follow it to the T, and it was like, and so he kind of taught me how to do that, which was really good. And then,
well, can you talk a little bit about the philosophy there? I mean, what was Herschel, what to him was the law?
It was the Bible.
But every Christian ever.
No, he was one of those guys that said, if it says that, he says, anything you want to know, it's in the Bible. If you ever want to know what to do, it's in the Bible. What you're supposed to do is in here.
Yeah.
So you want to know what it says here, because every question that you're ever going to have, the answer for it is in here. Yeah. And he was really like, so that was kind of his, like, to him it was God's word. Yeah. And you didn't mess with it. Like you didn't question that. You could go do your own thing if you wanted, but you didn't question the Bible. And Herschel was very kind and liberal to other people who were around him. He never hassled anybody for not being Christian, but he was, and everybody really respected Herschel a lot because he had put this whole thing together. Yeah. But he was a real hard guy. Like, they were having problems with their PTA thing, property owners thing, and they asked Herschel to come in and speak to them one time, and he came in and he like opened up a book of, I don't know, some book by some Moby Dick or something, comes in, just starts reading out of it. It goes on for about a half an hour. Finally, some brave soul raises his hands and he goes, Herschel, what does this have to do with what we're here to talk about? And Herschel looks at him and goes, absolutely nothing. Just like everything that you guys are doing here. There's no point to it, just like everything else you're doing. And it was like, if you want to know what to do, go home and read your Bible. That'd be his way of dealing with it, And so he really instilled in me this, like a dogma, like a dogmatic. Herschel was a very dogmatic kind of Christian. But it was so bizarre because he wasn't like at all like a church person. He never went to church, nothing like that, It's just him and me, and him and his family, and studying Bible together and stuff, And Frankie, she was like this other, she's another smoking, skinny old gal smoking cigarettes all the time. And they like lived off of, they would cut coupons. They had bags and bags and bags full of coupons all over the house. They would cut coupons, and somebody were making money. You know about that? No. Yeah, it's like, buy one, get one free, or send in 2 coupons, And so they had all these coupons, and they would send them in, and people they'd send them back stuff and shit. Very bizarre. But he did that, and he was a gambler. Mm-hmm. He would gamble. Okay. He was a poker player, and he played poker so he smoked just huge amounts of really, really good weed, you know, and I think he sold a little weed on the side too, you know, and but I never got involved in anything. My relationship was always just about us reading Bible together. That was all we ever did, really.
How long were you up in Castle Valley with Herschel?
I don't know, probably a year or so.
A year or so. Okay. Timeline will never make sense, but that's all right.
No, it doesn't. And then he got mad at I got mad at him, really. He accused me of flirting with Frankie one day.
Mm-hmm.
We were riding into Moab, and sometimes, not always, but every now and then I'd go with him. He'd go in to go grocery shopping, and I'd get out and I'd run around and get myself into trouble, and then go back out to his house. But on the way in, he gave me some shit about with Frankie, which was completely out of my mind. I never would do that. Frankie didn't interest me at all, first of all, and she was Herschel's wife, secondly. And I got angry with him. It's like, no, he's like, stop the car and let me out, you know. So I got out and I went back out to Castle Valley and I got my stuff. And I was like loading my stuff into my truck. Had no idea where I was going to go, what I was going to do. I just knew I was leaving. I'm loading all my stuff into my truck. And this guy, Rick Herrick, pulls up. He goes, what are you doing? I go, I'm leaving. He goes, well, you want to go live in my place over there? You know, about a mile down the road, you know, in Castle Valley. He goes, I have a place over there. You can live over there. Nobody's there. So I go over there, and it's a hole in the ground.
Mm.
Big, huge hole that somebody dug with a tractor and then covered it with plywood and stuff. It was amazing. I'm like living in this hole. You know, there's no windows or anything. But I had everything. I had a refrigerator and oven and, you know, all that. It was very comfortable. Nice and warm, nice and cool. And I stayed there, and in that hole, I read the whole Bible while I was sitting there in the hole. And then it was not long after that I went back into Moab, and I was doing the wood thing, and that's when I got the offer from Bob Walker to go to Hawaii. So I went to Hawaii at that point. But me and Herschel had made friends again before that, so we were back to being friends again. And Herschel and I remained very close, very good friends, right up till the day before he died. Was last time I saw him and it was beautiful. Last thing I'd been over there, because I'd go over there and smoke cigarettes and read Bible with him, smoke joints.
Mm-hmm.
Did that for a couple of years, and I think this was even after I had married Renee, and yeah, it was. And so I was over there one day and. Just the usual thing, and as I was leaving, I'm walking out the door, and it was funny because he kind of stopped me. He's like, Scott, and then, yeah, he says, I love you, brother, you know. That's the last thing he said to me. The next day he was dead. So that was a really beautiful thing, you know. Herschel last words to me was, I love you, and that meant a lot. Because Herschel didn't love everybody, you know. I mean, he was a hardcore guy, and that he, you know, loved me with that amount, and because he knew that I loved him too, and he really had a lot of respect, even though he knew. I mean, I was just this wild. I wasn't like him. I didn't have that dogmatic thing going that he did. I tried to some degree, and I certainly learned to discipline myself while I was with him, and which was good because when I was in Hawaii, I had like pure discipline. Mm-hmm. When I was in Hawaii. So I went to Hawaii, met your mom and everything, and then I came back, and Herschel became my friend. Mm-hmm. I was still seeing Herschel a lot after I came back from Hawaii, and then that's when he died. But before when I went to Hawaii, I went, and there's one reason I was so successful in Hawaii when I got there was because I was very disciplined.
Yeah. Well, so I guess we'll talk about that more later. Yeah, now's probably a good time to break for dinner and watch some football.
Yeah, well, before I leave, I just do want to say that, you know, these people that I talk about in my life, you know, I love them all really dearly. every one of them taught me something important.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something I would just pass on to anybody. It's like there's something that you can learn from everybody you meet. Just pay attention and watch what they say, watch what they do, treat them with as much respect as you can, and look for the lesson that they're trying to show you. Everyone is they don't even know they're doing it, but there's a lesson in almost every relationship that you have with someone, and I just feel like I'm one of the most blessed people on earth to have met Sourdough Jim and then there were other mentors later on after that, so
yeah,
pretty lucky guy. But thank you.
Yeah, love you, Dad.
Love you, Dad.
All right, let's take a break.
What time is it?
It's 6:04.